What's going on, everybody? I'm Jory Goodman, the Time Teller. Welcome to this installment of Micro Brand Monday, and I have to thank one of my channel members, Bad Matt, for making this possible because he sent in a watch that he wanted to see me review, and it just so happens that this watchmaker we're going to take a look at today is a watchmaker that has been requested over and over and over again from many of you guys. Just a bunch of you want to see my opinion about this micro brand watchmaker, so without further ado, we're finally going to take a look at a Dan Henry. So, Bad Matt, this one's for you. It is 1:04 p.m. Let's get down to business. Okie dokie, so a Dan Henry. People want me to talk about the packaging. This is actually something I have never seen on this channel. Seems to be like a plastic cylinder of sorts. You get a lot of knurling here. I assume you, just unthread it. And in pure micro brand fashion, there is a watch roll inside. All right, let's clear this area and see what we have in store here. It's like a canvas with leather backing. We have a, I believe, leather strap and a beads of rice bracelet with a 3-register chronograph. Interesting. So here we have a Dan Henry 1964 Gran Turismo chronograph. Now we can see this has 3 registers, so this would be their tri-compacts variant. Now these were limited to, I believe, 1964 units, and you could get them in a bi-compacts, which is a dual register variant, or a tri-compacts variant. And guys, you know what? Let's go ahead and take a look at all the different dial variants that Dan Henry offers. Okie dokie, so Dan Henry offers 10 variants when it comes to these Gran Turismo 1964 chronographs. You have a white panda tri-compact, silver panda tri-compacts, evil panda tri-compacts, silver tri-compacts, slate gray tri-compacts, and then the same offerings with the dual register bi-compacts variant. And guys, when I say tri-compacts or register, I'm literally talking about the sub-dials. So if you want to learn about what a chronograph is, I actually have an episode for the beginner watch collector right up here, top right hand corner. Click that and check out that episode. Okay guys, so in this shot we can really see a nice contrast coming from those sub dials, that kind of matte dial, and then the blue hands. Now these aren't blued hands as far as like heat treated hands. These are actually painted blue, at least from the looks of it here, but it is still a handsome, very simple, almost vintage-esque aesthetic, and we obviously know that's what Dan Henry was going for, because let's face it, Dan Henry is essentially a watchmaker that produces homages to the vintage genre. Can we say that? Like pretty much every Dan Henry is just an homage to a vintage style out there. And being a vintage collector, this is gonna kind of get me in hot water. I would rather just get a vintage watch, right? That's been my main beef with Dan Henry. I would just rather have a vintage watch, but the more and more I spend, or the more time, I spend amongst other watch collectors, I realize that there is kind of a place for a modern take on a vintage watch, because not everybody wants to have a vintage chronograph on their wrist at all times. Sometimes you want something a bit more affordable and something that you don't want to have to baby. Now, speaking of affordable, this comes in at $260. Now, I said earlier, these were limited to 1964 pieces. I don't know if that's for the whole lot or for each dial variant. What I will say is at 260, I doubt that these are like actually hyper limited pieces. I would not consider these hyper limited. And with those, you know, the plethora of dial variants, bicompacts, tricompacts, in a multitude of colorways, we can see that these aren't actually super duper limited pieces, and $260, well within what I would consider to be the entry level price point. Now, we're going to talk about the specs here in a second, but what I will say is at $260, although this watch does have some interesting specs, it's not a total spec monster. Like, there are other watches within this price range that absolutely outspec this Dan Henry 1964 GT. With Dan Henry, and again, this is kind of my main beef with this company, I think most of the money, like most of what you are paying for, is just that vintage aesthetic, right? I mean, we just took a look, let's see, this year at the Axios flagship. We took a look at that Beaufort Cavalli. These are watches that also kind of nail that vintage aesthetic, that are definite spec monsters. And this Dan Henry chronograph, when we get into the spec sheet, you're gonna see it's not all that impressive spec-wise. And although you're not paying a ton of money for it, I think most of what you're paying for is just this vintage look. So let's go ahead, I'll stop delaying, and we will talk about the specifications. Here we can see the dimensions of that 316L stainless steel case. That's right, 38 by 44.7. So 38 millimeter case diameter, that's perfectly fine, well under that 40 millimeter sweet spot. And 44.7 millimeter lug to lug, again, as long as it's well below 50 millimeters, I think that's perfectly fine. And this watch is, I believe, 12.9 millimeters thick. And I gotta be honest, that is a bit thick for a non-mechanical watch. And yes, that's right, this does not have any form of mechanical movement, as we can see that 6 o'clock register tick, tick, ticking away. This is a mecha quartz, so not truly mechanical. It does have that gear that gives the chronograph hand a nice sweep, and it is powered, of course, by a Seiko VK63 mecha quartz movement. You're getting a double-domed, sapphire-coated mineral crystal with anti-reflective treatment. So guys, whenever you hear sapphire-coated mineral, that's mostly marketing. The truth is, you still gotta treat this essentially like a mineral crystal. We're gonna go ahead and take a look at how that double dome kind of affects the distortion. I love to see crystal distortion, and again, if this is truly going for a vintage aesthetic, there should be that kind of distortion coming from the edge of the crystal. This does have a 50 meter water resistance rating. It has some Luminova Lume, which we will test. And again, this is kind of a really nice reverse panda, nicely contrasted, high visible 3-register chronograph. And I think this, with the whole case shape, with the dimensions, and especially with it on a beads of rice bracelet, really nails that vintage look. So let's go ahead and we'll put it on the wrist, and then we'll get up close and we'll kind of talk about the setting and function and how everything feels. Okie dokie, so before I put it on the wrist, let's take a look at the bracelet and clasp. Again, I'm a huge fan of beads of rice. I think that it just nails the vintage look. I think that beads of rice bracelets are very, very comfortable. I haven't found them to be particular hair pullers, although I could see them potentially pulling people's hair. I've never had that experience, but I've never worn this specific Dan Henry bracelet. Here we have a Dan Henry signed clasp. If we press this button, we will get some retention. Now, I should say this is Bad Matt's watch, so of course there are going to be some scuffs, but we love to see that, guys. We want you to wear your watches. And let's open the clasp up for a moment and take a look at that case back. It says Mecha Quartz, 50 meter, 165 feet, referring to the water resistance rating. It says Dan Henry, 1964, limited edition. I suppose this is number 294 out of 1964. And this is stainless steel. Okie dokie. And I think, yes, we do have a signed crown. It says DH. Cool. Designated hitter. Let's go ahead and put it on the wrist. All right, guys, so here it is on my 7.5-inch wrist. This specific one here is a bit tight because this is sized up to Matt's wrist. For reference, I do have a 7.5-inch wrist. I was able to close the clasp, but I probably would never wear a watch this tight. It is a bit tight on the wrist. But we can see the case dimensions, the lug to lug, everything is pretty much spot on, well within what I would consider to be the sweet spot. So if you have wrists a bit smaller than mine or a bit larger than mine, I think that this could wear perfectly on your wrist. This is not an oversized piece. And, oh yeah, let's close in on that in a moment. Oh, my mouth is watering. Yep. Oh yeah, crystal distortion, baby. Double domed mineral. Oh, but it has sapphire coating. Okay, it's mineral, guys. And the beads of rice, for the most part, comfortable, a bit tight on my wrist, but again, this is not my watch. Man, so far, I think the best part about this watch is the crystal, if I'm totally honest. Okay, guys, so the chronograph hand has been running for a little while. Let's go ahead and stop it by pushing the top pusher, and then we'll clear it by pushing the bottom pusher. So again, that mecha quartz movement gives a nice kind of smoother sweep to that chronograph hand, and we will clear it. Let's go ahead and set the time, and we can kind of see how the crown feels. Again, this is not going to be a threaded crown. We will pull it. This does have 2 crown settings because the truth is, I believe this movement does have a date complication. So this does have a ghosted date. Very smooth actuation as far as, you know, rotating through the dial. No weird gritty or graininess. Cannot complain. Let's go ahead and really scrutinize those sub-dials and take full advantage of this macro lens. Man, that crystal, crazy. All right, guys, so initially I framed up these shots to talk about the sub-dials, but I actually see something that might be a bit nitpicky, and again, we do have to take into consideration the fact that this is a $260 watch, but again, you guys send me these watches to review, and I'm going to review it. And Bad Matt knows that I'm not the biggest fan of Dan Henry, and he wanted me to be as harsh and honest as I can be. So Bad Matt, this is for you. We're doing it live here in the Battle Gym. Okay, so for you guys to understand that reference, you got to join us every Saturday around 11:30 a.m. Pacific for our live stream here at the channel. Anyway, let's talk about this little nitpicky thing here. The handset, not finished incredibly well. Okay, so again, we're not talking about dual finishing or anything crazy on the handset, but we can see all along the top edge of that hour hand, there are some burrs. We can see it picking up the light there. And then also at this index, the 10 o'clock index there, we can see that that is not finished perfectly. We'll get up a little bit closer and you can see what I mean. We can see some imperfections there. And then we will talk about the subdial. So let's close in on that 10 o'clock index. So guys, we are kind of hovering over this 10 o'clock index. Nicely applied indexes, however, this one specifically out of all that I've seen has a bunch of specs on it. And guys, when we're working with matte dials, I keep saying this over and over again every time I review a watch, the things need to be perfect because matte dials, especially black dials, incredibly unforgiving, okay? So when we have a matte black dial and we apply an index, that's going to really pop, right? That's the whole point. You want that contrast. So these really high polished indexes, they're going to look great, right? They're going to catch our eyes. They're going to play with the light. However, if there are specks or sediment or it's just poorly finished, that's also going to show. So this, unfortunately, is kind of a dirty index here. Let's go ahead and kind of look around a bit more. Okay, so guys, in this shot, I want to show you some of the beauty of this watch, right? The angular cuts of these indexes, the kind of mirrored finish that shows the reflection of the underside of that chronograph hand. Even the tip of the minute hand there is catching the light. I love the dynamic look of this watch. Again, when you have a simple design, you really need to nail that design. It makes it even more difficult because things that are super duper busy, imperfections can get lost, but these really simple, this really simple design language, you have to nail it. And here on this side of the dial, everything looks pretty nice for the most part. However, there's two indexes so far that I've seen that are kind of imperfect. The first one was that 10 o'clock, and then the other one is here. On the top side of this 4 o'clock index, again, we see those specks. And then actually, here on the 5 o'clock index, we see it as well. I don't know how well you guys can see it over there, but on playback, I can even see it. And I know people are going to say, oh, this is a $260 watch. T3 is just being a snob, blah, 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 blah. Well, the truth is, yeah, I mean, like, I'm reviewing these watches. Like, the macro lens shows everything. Like, I'm not trying to be mean here, guys. The macro lens, blame the macro lens. For the most part, the dial has been pretty clean. However, on this 6 o'clock sub-dial, I am seeing a little speck right kind of the lower left of that 15 marker. Gato, you can circle that. There is a black speck on that sub-dial. And then actually this 24-hour sub-dial here over on the right, this is the right register, is probably going to be the most controversial part about this watch for most people, because a lot of these people in the comment section are unhappy when a watch has a 24-hour dial. And I understand, like, I don't regularly use a 24-hour dial, but you know, it's cool that they have it, I suppose. And if you want something to be a vintage 3-register chronograph, you know, you have to have a movement that accommodates 3 registers. So is this kind of something silly? Is it something you would use? Let me know in the comment section. Okay guys, so we have spent an afternoon with a Dan Henry for the first time ever on this channel on camera. So of course, let me know what you think in the comment section below, because commenting really does help my videos in the algorithm. But here's my take. For 260 bucks, you're getting a very handsome, vintage styled modern chronograph. It's not like a total spec monster, but the crystal is beautiful. Like, I understand it is just a mineral crystal, but that distortion and the double domed shape really truly does make for that vintage design language to resonate with your eye. It just looks beautiful. And then really nice contrast, you know, the matte dial is beautiful. The applied indexes do catch the light nicely. However, there are a few imperfections. It's not the cleanest watch I've seen, and I'm not talking about the scuffs on the case or anything. Like, this was a viewer worn watch. This is someone's actual watch. I'm talking about the things under the crystal on the dial. The handset had a few burrs on the edge. There were a few indexes that were not finished as nicely as I'd like. And although this is an entry-level watch, still, that's not really an excuse. I'm not making fun of this watch because it doesn't have a tourbillon. I simply want a clean watch, regardless of the price point. The bracelet is beautiful. Everything felt good, right? Like, the crown felt fine, the pushers felt fine. Is this a sports watch? Is it a dress watch? Is it an everyday piece? Well, I wouldn't necessarily call it a sports watch. Like, I wouldn't want to go out of my way to get this wet or bang on it too much. However, I think this is a very competent everyday piece, and it's a looker, right? I absolutely love vintage chronographs. And when you factor in the dimensions, I mean, it's well within the sweet spot of every metric. I mean, it's well below 50 millimeters when we're talking about lug to lug, and it's well below 40 millimeters when we're talking about the case diameter. It's maybe a tad bit thick, coming in right around 13 millimeters thick for no mechanical movement at all, but it's not cumbersome. So I think that if you're looking for a vintage chronograph, but you're not willing to pull the trigger just yet on an actual vintage watch, because again, there are things associated with vintage watch collecting that is quite different than modern watch collecting. And if you want to learn everything I wish I knew before I started collecting vintage watches, click up here at the top right corner and you can learn all about that. But yeah, if you're looking for a vintage styled watch without the headache, this is definitely an option for you guys, but we have to take into consideration the imperfections and the lack of impressive specs. But if you're okay with that, this could be a contender. So Bad Matt, thank you for making this episode possible. All my channel members, thank you for making my channel possible. For all my viewers, you freaking rock. We just broke past 161,000 subscribers. Crazy growth here, and I'm so blessed to be doing what I do, and I can't do it without any of you guys. So thank you so much. Seems like you guys are really enjoying the Microbrand Monday reviews, and we're gonna keep doing it for as long as humanly possible. We won't stop. We can't stop. We will keep doing this. Guys, I love you, each and every one of you. Thanks for supporting the channel. Check out all the affiliate links in the description below. When you shop using those links, you help me out a bunch. Check out my personal website, www.thetimetellershop.com, the #1 place to find affordable vintage luxury watches. So if you do want to pull the trigger on an actual vintage watch, check out my website. And, you know, stay happy, stay healthy, stay blessed. As usual, I will see you on the next one. I'm Jory Goodman, the Time Teller, and always remember, I didn't invent time. I just tell it.